Hi everyone, my name is Travis Alabanza, and I am coming to you live from my self-isolation pod here in London. It feels odd to be doing this video amidst a time of such great uncertainty, but it feels really important to step into it and still commit to the work and do it. Sometimes distraction is the best form of therapy. I hope you can all hear me. I excuse that normally I would look a lot better with a lot more makeup and a lot better outfit, but I have been feeling under the weather a bit too, so who knows what it is. So this is what we're getting today. But nothing says keeping it queer than turning up as the self that you're meant to be that day. So when I was invited to speak at the conference, I was trying to think about what from a position as a trans person of colour in society did I want to talk about. And I felt like pre-coronavirus, the media had a different obsession. It's actually been quite nice having a media break of an obsession on something else, but I think it shows us how the media obsesses over things and continues to create panic around them. For the last 4 or 5 years, it's felt like we have been in a moment of trans hypervisibility, meaning that I think trans people up and down the country have been under heightened surveillance. We've seen hate crime go up around trans people from up to 72%, and that's only the hate crimes reported. As we know, so many trans people don't report the hate crimes they experience to the police. We've seen media coverage from trans people quadruple in some places, with the Sunday Times having trans people in nearly every other Sunday column. Trans Media Watch saying that most of these representations of trans people in the media aren't feeling positive. So suddenly a community that is told that it's often invisible, a community that is told that often has a problem around visibility, I argue that yes, we do have a problem around visibility, but actually it's the fact that we had a heightened visibility on us, and therefore a heightened surveillance. We saw a rise in anti-trans rhetoric, we saw a rise in anti-trans hate crime, we saw a rise in debate around trans bodies. Some would argue that suddenly we saw more trans people appearing in magazines, in adverts, in our media, and would suggest that that means that there is progress, but often visibility without structural support means that is not the case. What we actually saw was a heightened amount of discussion around trans people, but not an increase in support for our healthcare, not a decrease in our safety on the streets. And we started to see a really strong kind of theory come up against trans people, right? That transness was in antithesis, meaning that it was in conflict with feminism. Suddenly we saw a myth created by the right wing and also pushed by the liberal feminists as well, that transness was now in conflict with women's rights. Now, this was a false dichotomy for lots of reasons, but one of the things it does is erase that trans people are part of women's rights. Now, this is not going to be a talk that is discussing all the ways that transness is actually in solidarity and in line with women's rights. This isn't going to be a talk talking about all the ways in which anti-trans feminism is wrong. Hopefully, the fact that we're on an LGBT conference means that we don't need to do that. Instead, I guess what I'm interested in is this idea of placing transness as something distant from us in order to feel okay with oppressing transness. If we say that transness is something far away from us, then we make sense of then putting it down, as if something being far away makes us feel better about hating it. And instead, I want to suggest that maybe transness is the opposite. Maybe actually it is because of transness proximity to cisgender non-trans people that people are actually fearing it. That actually maybe transness holds an answer to something else. That actually maybe a trans liberation, thus working and fighting to free trans people, will save us all. In order to kind of get to that conclusion, the conclusion being that I believe fighting for trans rights is actually fighting for everyone's rights, that actually the fear of trans people does not come from fear that is a lack of understanding, rather actually knowing something so well. I'm going to give a few anecdotes to support that. Some of these will involve some stories of harassment and violence, just for a content warning. I would have thrown in like a little joke as well to the audience by now, because too much talking without a joke doesn't work. But without an audience and just my blank wall, it's a lot harder. So if you are watching this online, now would be the time that I'd take a sip of water from the lectern. So just imagine that. I don't know if I'm going to edit that out. So yeah, I was thinking about what anecdotes for me support this, and I was thinking about how when I was 7 years old, and being socialised male with lots of different boys at sleepovers, I remember that at this particular sleepover I was thinking about all the boys found one of their sisters that we were staying around their house's makeup. And I remember being so excited that we found it, but wondering if we were going to be allowed to use it. And the sister encouraged us. What we then saw was that we all played with, the lipsticks and the nail varnish and painted each other's fingernails and toenails. And I remember being so excited and happy about it, but also that it wasn't really a big thing. And then you fast forward to when I'm 13, 14 years old, and I start deciding to wear nail varnish and fingernail paint to school. And suddenly the whole world had changed. Everyone was calling me a faggot. Everyone was shouting homophobic abuse. People were asking me if I'm a girl. And the same person, the boy that I had a sleepover with, started also calling me homophobic slurs and names. And, that was quite a common experience. If you are someone that is gender non-conforming at school, often you will be bullied, picked on, harassed. And it's just kind of like a common thing that we accept. But then I remember, if I fast forwarded just 4 years from the time I was 14 to 18, and I went to a festival on the outskirts of Bristol, call me a cliche, and I remember seeing the same person that called me a faggot when I was 14, who was the same person trying on nail varnish when I was 7, now in a skirt, makeup, hair paint at a rave at a festival. And we said hi to each other and kept on moving. This isn't a unique pattern. It feels odd for me to pick up on festivals, but I feel like it's somewhere where we see something very interesting happen to gender. Suddenly lots of men that you may be used to homophobically attacking you or transphobically attacking you on the streets are suddenly using festivals as an excuse to wear dresses, heels, makeup and face paint. They love dressing up. I think we've probably all seen a stag do that suddenly decides to wear a dress on a night out as a way of being fun and celebrating. Now, that is not to say that those men are trans. That's not to say those men are anything other than enjoying a moment of dressing up. But it does hint me and tell me to something about gender nonconformity, about gender, and about transness. It reminds me that actually everyone has a complicated relationship with our gender, and that moreover, trans people are just being honest about that complicated relationship. That there's lots of binaries I don't believe in, the binary of good and bad, the binary of male and female. But there is a binary, I believe, of dishonest and honest. And I feel like maybe what it shows is that trans people are being honest with their gender. I think about how often we hurt the very things that have the potential to set us free. Meaning that so often maybe when we are being called faggot, hurled abuse at, shouted at, what they're actually wanting to say is I miss you. What they're actually wanting to say is I wish I could become you. I think about how we never talk about the moment where boys become men or girls become women, as if that transition isn't a harsh transition for people to make, whether you are cis or trans. As if actually it's not really hard for people to suddenly learn new rules about gender. I think about the boy that is allowed to be given and painted nails, that suddenly is then calling me a faggot for painting nails, that is suddenly then at a festival painting nails for an escape. And I wonder why and how so many rules encoded around gender become. And then I wonder about how and why all the punishment is on trans people. I wonder what it would look like if we allowed trans people to be celebrated for the genders that they are, and how that would in turn benefit everyone else as well. It made me think about this time that I was on a tube. I was on a tube during rush hour on the Victoria line. And I was wearing some heels, a sparkly dress, and some ties. And these group of businessmen decided to start laughing at me. When I turned around to them and said, "What are you laughing at?" they said, "We just like your shoes." And they said it as a joke, but I felt like they may also being honest. And I thought about how much attack, and harassment that's faced at trans people may also be coded jealousy, that actually what they see in us is a freedom to decide what we want. And the reason I think that supporting transness is beneficial for us all is because what transness represents is actually something that all of society would benefit from. If we look at gender and what trans people are saying, ultimately they're saying that you gave us a gender without our consent at birth, and then we are deciding to take ownership over our own bodies and our decision. Ultimately, transness becomes a fight for consent. Ultimately, transness becomes a fight for autonomy. Ultimately, transness becomes a decision to say that this is what we actually deserve to have, autonomy and consent over our bodies. And ultimately, that's a world that is too scary for a lot of people to live in. But in turn, if we join in solidarity for the struggle of trans people, we're not just joining in a solidarity for trans people alone, but we're also saying that we take bodily autonomy and consent important. And that would benefit us all. It's saying that we deserve to say who we say we are and not have people treat us badly because of it. It's saying that we deserve to have a world where people can wear, be, look, appear however they choose, and their respect shouldn't be contingent upon that. And that's a world that would benefit everyone. I often say that if trans people can walk down the street safely, then all streets will be safe for everyone. And I mean that. So much of violence is about gender. So much of violence is about gender expression. And trans people are ultimately facing the heightened amount of axis violence against that. And if suddenly we fight for a solidarity between trans people, then everyone will breathe lighter on the streets too. I think about if we make an education, a society, a workplace inclusive for trans people, that's not just letting trans people be safe, it's also letting all of your employees express gender in a more free way. I think about how much violence comes from cisgender men to other people in the community, and how much of that violence is based around gender, gender repression, and gender anger. I think about how even if we go to cis male issues such as no femmes, no fats, or mask for mask culture, how so much of that is rooted in gender expression and a gender uncertainty, that so many people have anxiousness around their gender and presentation. And actually, if we join together in fighting for a more gender-liberated world, one where gender doesn't feel as urgent, one where our gender assigned at birth doesn't feel as banning and damning, then actually we are fighting for a world for us all. And ultimately, trans people come at the centre of that world. I think it's so interesting because when a community of people are as oppressed as trans people, both physically, financially, structurally, often you can think of them only in response to our violence. We hear of trans murders, we hear of the deaths, we hear of the unemployment, we see the headlines. And that means that it's very easy to stop thinking about all the ways that trans people add to society. So much of our art, culture, and history wouldn't exist without the trans community. And that's why I really want to end this by saying that actually, instead of seeing trans as a burden, as a problem to solve, what we actually need to see is transness as the gift. That actually transness is a gift that right now isn't being received well, with proper things in place. But that actually what transness teaches us about society is a freedom we could all gain from. That actually, instead of distancing ourselves from transness, we have to closen ourselves to it in order to support it properly. What would a trans future look like for all of feminism? What would a future where we celebrate gender nonconformity look like for all men and all women and all people that are neither? What would transness, being seen as a gift, do for everyone's healing? I feel like a trans-liberated future, one that sees trans people as the gift they are, can help everyone free from a gender-based violence world. Thank you.